Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laurel, and I am. This is a channel about digital and hybrid paper crafting. If you have not yet watched my first video, I will link that down below so that you can go and catch that. But otherwise, we're here today because I would like to have a little talk about Photoshop brushes, especially using them in Photoshop Elements. If you don't know what a brush is, just really quickly, a brush is a tool that you use in Photoshop Elements. It's in the toolbar down the left side of the workspace, and what that is for is you can go and grab whichever brush you want with that little arrow tool, and then what you'll do is you'll see a little outline or a shape of something. It could be a circle, it could be a picture of someone's face, or an image like a heart. And what you do with that is you can click down onto whatever surface you're working there with in Photoshop, and it'll print a little image. Some people call these things digital, like they're like a digital rubber stamp that you can put a picture on your image with. Other people, the reason they're referred to brushes is primarily because I think in the beginning at least a lot of them were brush strokes that people had scanned in using paint brushes and other types of art brushes, and they scanned them in, and then they used them in this tool to create painty effects and things like that, and those are cool too. It's just a matter of understanding what you're using, which is basically a brush. It's called a brush, or I guess a digital rubber stamp. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is that a lot of videos I see, again, are done in the full version of Photoshop. So installing brushes in Photoshop is a little tiny bit different than Photoshop Elements, but you can definitely do it. It's not a complicated process, you just have to know the steps to take. The other thing that I think gets overlooked a lot, and I don't see much talk about it amongst digital paper crafters, is the fact that there's two different ways that you can go about using a brush in Photoshop Elements. You can either load the brush into Elements, which means you're going to temporarily install it for a little bit, and then you're going to use it for just that session of Photoshop. And then the next time you come back into the program, that brush is going to be gone and it won't be there anymore. The other way to do it is to just permanently install the brush into the preset manager, which I will show you in just a minute when we go to the computer screen. But there's pluses and minuses to both of those methods. So another thing to note is that once I go over the basics of installing and loading brushes in Photoshop, then it will be time for you to, if you want to go to the web and find some cool brushes that you can install and play around with and see if you like using them. I will link you a couple of free sites and then that let you download brushes for free. If you would like to see what I think about using those two methods and see the pros and cons, then just keep watching. Okay, so to demo how to load a brush in Photoshop Elements, we're going to the Brush Easy site, which has free brush downloads. We're going to download the set of brushes that look like cracks in the sidewalk and click that free download button. Then what we're going to do is go to a location on our computer and save it to a place that we'll be able to find it later. Now, one thing to note is that these are zip files, which means that if you're working on a PC, that you need to have file extraction software like WinZip or WinRAR, because these files are compressed and you need something to decompress and expand them so you can use them. If you're lucky enough to be on a Mac like I am, then all you have to do is click on the zip file like I'm showing you here, and the computer will automatically expand it for you. Now what we're going to do from here is to start a new project in Photoshop Elements, and what I've done is I've gone ahead and plopped a yellow piece of cardstock down and stamped some butterfly brushes on. And now I'm going to go over to the brush tool and click on it, and I'm going to load these brushes into the brush picker. So I went down there and got that little square that I'm hovering over, and I'm going to pick load brushes, and then what it's going to do is it's going to prompt me to go back to that place on my computer where the files were saved and find them. The one way you know that you've saved a brush file is after the name of the brush, you'll see the notation that says .abr, and that's always how you find a brush file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find that file, find the name of it, and click on it. And we're going to click that right there, and it's going to open those brushes in the brush picker and show me the choices of all the brushes I have. So I'm going to go ahead and find my favorite. I've created a new layer to stamp this onto so that I can move this cracked background around if I need to. And I've noticed that it's the wrong size for the paper and that it's a little dark, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit find those transformation handles and drag it down so it fits, and just give it a little adjustment there. And then from here, what I'm going to do is just try out the opacity slider and the blending modes to see what I like. So I decided to start with a blending mode, so I got that pull down menu and I chose soft light, and decided that it was just a little too faint and hard to see, so I undid that, and then I went over to the opacity slider in the layers palette and adjusted the opacity to about 24%, and I think that looks pretty good. So you can see here how cool brushes are, a few of the fun things you can do, and that's how you load a brush into Photoshop Elements. Okay, so now we're going to permanently install a brush into Elements by going to the same Brush Easy site, and we're going to pick out this set of butterfly brushes. We're going to click that free download button, and what we're going to do now is instead of just finding a random place to save it, we're going to follow a specific path that will get us to the Adobe Photoshop Elements preset manager. And there's a very specific path. It's fairly similar in Photoshop on a PC and on a Mac, but there are some slight differences. So for you guys that are on PCs, I'm going to actually have the path listed on the screen, and I'm going to demonstrate that here in Mac. And what you do first is you go to Applications, Adobe Photoshop 13, Support Files, Presets, and then Brushes. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take that same path to load our brushes into the preset manager. So again, that is Applications, Adobe Photoshop 13, Support Files, Presets, and then Brushes. And that's where we are going to save our butterfly brushes file. So I found it there. I'm going to click on that. You can see that ABR notation, and I just unzipped my file. And so now when I go into Photoshop Elements, I'm going to see that brush set there. One thing I did forget to mention is that when you are permanently installing a brush into the preset manager, you need to have Photoshop completely shut off and not running at all, or it will not work. So what I've done now is I'm going to the brush picker and I'm finding my butterflies, and I'm choosing just some various colors to stamp my butterflies onto the page with. This one, I'm going to go to the foreground color and click D, and that changed it back to black. And then what I'm going to do before I stamp it down is go down to the brush settings bar, the button right there on the right, and I'm going to click that, and I'm going to take that little circle slider that changes the angle of the brush. It's on the bottom there. I'm going to grab it and rotate it so that that butterfly is at a fun angle. And then I'm going to go back and get a third butterfly and do something similar with it. I'm going to grab a different one out of that brush set. And I decided I didn't want this one to be black, so I'm going to go ahead and change the color after I get this one positioned. I'm going to change its angle again to a fun angle. And then, yeah, I'm going to go into the foreground color square and click it. And I'm going to choose kind of an aqua color. It took me a minute to decide on what color I wanted, but in the end I decided to stick with that aqua color. And then I'm going to stamp down on my paper. And then just like I did in the other one, I'm going to have that yellow paper in the background, so I decided to pull that yellow paper onto my page, and I'm going to resize it so that it looks like it fits the page. And then the nice thing about this is that when I come back into Photoshop Elements the next time, I will still find this brush set if I click on the brush tool and go down to the brush picker to use. So there basically is how you install a brush. Alright, so now that you know how to load or install a brush, you might be wondering which method is better. Well, I'd say it depends on what you're doing on that particular time or what your preferences are. So when we talk about loading brushes, one of the biggest reasons that some scrappers choose to just load them is that the software will run faster if there's less brushes and other presets installed into the program. For some reason, if there's a lot, it just seems to slow the program down and just it can be painful to work with. So the other thing that I think that is great about just loading brushes in is it's good for those times when you just have a brush that you're going to use once or twice maybe, and you don't want it in with your other installed brushes. You know you'll never use it again. You know, for one time I had an art journaling page I was working on. and I wanted a brush image of dollar bills to create a background effect that I was going for. So I just went and found a free download that had dollar bills in it. I used it, I loaded them in and used it once or twice, and then I was done. And that just worked out easier for me. On the flip side of that, that can also be a drawback, because the brushes that are loaded in will only be available during that particular session of Photoshop that you're working in. Once you close the program, exit out of it and come back in another time, their brushes are just simply going to be gone. So that's something to think about there. Now, when it comes to installing brushes, I think it's really great to install brushes that you know you're going to use on a very regular basis. For instance, I have a set of distressed brushes, and I use them to ink up and grunge up the edges of my layouts, and I really love it. So it's something I use nearly every time I'm in the program. So for me to have to go into my computer hard drive, find where those are located, and load them in each time, that would just be really tedious, and I feel like it would be time consuming. So with those, I went ahead and chose to install them. It saves me time and effort every time I do that, just because it makes more sense to have those brushes in there and ready for me to use. And at the same time, like I mentioned before, if there are too many brushes, your software will run slower and it will seem to be bogged down. So I don't think that you should just not install any brushes. I do think it's useful to install at least some of the ones that you find are the most useful. But again, if you prefer one of these methods over the other, then just go ahead and use them and enjoy them. Anyways, guys, if you've stuck with me this long, thanks so much for watching, and I hope that if you haven't subscribed already, that you will. And don't forget to share, like, and leave comments. Okay, guys, have a beautiful day. I'll see you later.